Harrison Green clutched his worn leather satchel tighter as the stagecoach rattled into Silver Gap. Dust coated his once fine suit, now threadbare at the elbows. His eyes, hollow from sleepless nights, scanned the remote mining towns sprawled across the narrow valley. Wooden buildings clung to the mountainside like desperate men to fading dreams. This would be his refuge or his tomb. As the coach lurched to a stop, Harrison caught sight of a man watching from the balcony of the largest building in town. Even at this distance, power radiated from his stance. Their eyes met briefly, and Harrison felt a chill despite the scorching afternoon heat. He'd come here to disappear, but already sensed that anonymity might prove as elusive as the justice he'd once believed in. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. Name? Barked the clerk at the Valley Inn, barely glancing up from his ledger. James Wilson, Harrison replied, the false name feeling strange on his tongue. 3 months of practicing it hadn't made it fit any better. Purpose in Silver Gap? The man's pen hovered expectantly. Harrison hesitated. Looking for work. I've done some bookkeeping. The clerk snorted. Ain't much need for numbers men here except for the mining office, and Blackwood only hires friends. He pushed a rusty key across the counter. Rooms upstairs. $2 a week in advance. Harrison counted out the coins, nearly half his remaining funds, and trudged upstairs. The room was sparse. A sagging bed, a washstand with a cracked basin, and a small window overlooking the main street. He placed his law books at the bottom of his trunk, covering them with shirts. No one could know who he really was. Morning revealed Silver Gap's true nature. The town existed in the shadow of the Blackwood Mining Company. The massive operation dominated the eastern slope, cables and carts perpetually in motion. Harrison secured employment at Porter's General Store, mainly due to Mrs. Porter's soft heart rather than need for help. She was a kindly woman with knowing eyes that made Harrison uncomfortable. Not many educated men drift into Silver Gap unless they're running from something, she remarked on his third day, watching him meticulously organize the ledger. I'm just looking for a quiet place, he replied, avoiding her gaze. Well, you won't find that here. Not with Victor Blackwood squeezing the life out of every claim that isn't his. She lowered her voice. Mark my words, troubles brewing again with the Reed widow. Harrison learned more about Eleanor Reed in fragments over the following days. Her husband Thomas had died in a mining accident 6 months prior, leaving her to manage their small but productive silver claim. Blackwood had offered to buy her out at a fraction of its worth. When she refused, problems began, equipment failures, supply shortages, workers intimidated into quitting. He first saw her on a Wednesday afternoon, arguing with the feed store owner. Even in plain work clothes, smudged with dirt, Eleanor Reed possessed a dignified beauty that turned heads. Her auburn hair was fastened in a practical knot, and her posture remained regal despite the merchant's dismissive tone. Mr. Jenkins, this is the 3rd time your delivery has been delayed. I need that feed today. Mrs. Reed, I've told you. My suppliers are particular about whom I extend credit to. I've never asked for credit and I'm paying cash now, she countered, placing coins on the counter. Jenkins glanced nervously toward the saloon across the street. Perhaps you should consider Mr. Blackwood's offer. A woman alone can't. A woman alone can manage just fine when people honor their word, she interrupted, eyes flashing. Will you sell me the feed or not? Harrison pretended to examine canned goods as the exchange continued. Jenkins eventually relented, but only providing half the order. As Eleanor turned to leave, she caught Harrison watching and held his gaze for a moment. Her eyes conveyed not desperation but determination, and something in Harrison stirred, a feeling he'd thought buried beneath his disgrace. That evening, he sat alone in the town's smaller saloon, avoiding the grandiose Blackwood Emporium where the mining owner held court. The bartender, a grizzled man named Cooper, seemed forthcoming after Harrison purchased his second whiskey. The Reed claim sits on the richest vein discovered in 3 years, Cooper explained quietly. Blackwood wants it because it connects 2 of his larger operations. Word is, old Thomas Reed was getting ready to expand when he had his accident. Cable snapped clean through while inspecting a shaft. Was there an investigation? Harrison asked, professional instincts surfacing despite himself. Cooper laughed bitterly. Sheriff Drummond works for Blackwood, same as the judge and half the town council. Investigation found it was equipment failure due to poor maintenance. Blamed Reed himself. Commotion erupted outside. Harrison followed Cooper to the door. Across the street, Eleanor Reed stood surrounded by 3 men, her wagon loaded with supplies. One man held the horses' bridles while another rifled through her goods. "Just checking for contraband, Mrs. Reed," said a tall man with a deputy's badge. "Newtown ordinance about explosives." "There are no explosives, Deputy Mills, as you well know," Eleanor replied evenly. "This harassment is becoming tiresome." The third man, expensively dressed with a gold watch chain, stepped closer to her. "It wouldn't be necessary if you were reasonable, Eleanor. Mr. Blackwood's offer expires at the end of the month." Something in Harrison snapped. Before he could consider the consequences, he was crossing the street. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, positioning himself beside Eleanor. The well-dressed man assessed him with cold eyes. "Nothing that concerns store clerks. This is official business." "Searching private property requires specific cause," Harrison replied. "Or has the Constitution been suspended in Silver Gap?" Deputy Mills stepped forward menacingly. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Someone who can read the law," Harrison said, keeping his voice steady. "And someone who notices there are 15 witnesses to this abuse of authority." Indeed, a small crowd had gathered, watching silently. The well-dressed man glanced around, calculating. "We're done here for now. Mrs. Reed, remind your friend that newcomers to Silver Gap should learn local customs before inserting themselves where they don't belong." He nodded to his companions and they departed. Eleanor's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. James Wilson. That was Lawrence Preston, Blackwood's lawyer," she said quietly as they watched the men retreat. "Not a man to cross lightly." Harrison helped her collect the scattered supplies. "Do they harass you often?" "Increasingly." Her voice was controlled but weary. "I should thank you, but you've probably just made yourself a target." "I'm nobody important," Harrison replied. "Just a bookkeeper." Eleanor studied him with intelligent eyes. "No bookkeeper I've ever known quotes constitutional law to armed men, Mr. Wilson." She climbed onto her wagon. "You should be careful. Victor Blackwood destroys anyone who stands in his way." Harrison watched her drive away, stomach churning with familiar anxiety. He'd promised himself no involvement, no confrontations. Head down, anonymous, safe. Yet here he was, drawing exactly the kind of attention he'd fled Boston to avoid. 2 days later, Mrs. Porter cornered him while he inventoried dry goods. "Mrs. Reed is asking after you. Says she has a business proposition." Harrison felt a prickle of unease. "I'm not looking for new employment. That woman needs help, Mr. Wilson. Legal help if I'm reading things correctly." Mrs. Porter's eyes were knowing. "She's not one to ask unless she's desperate." "I'm a bookkeeper," he insisted. "And I'm the Queen of England," she retorted. "I recognize quality penmanship and legal terminology when I see it. Whatever you're running from, it might be worth helping someone being crushed by injustice." The words struck too close to home. "Where can I find her?" Eleanor's cabin sat a mile outside town near her claim. The small house was immaculate, with curtains at the windows and carefully tended flowers defying the harsh mountain soil. Beyond stood the mining operation, modest compared to Blackwood's, but well-organized with a stamp mill and several shaft entrances. She met him on the porch, dressed in a simple blue dress rather than work clothes. "Mr. Wilson, thank you for coming." Inside, the cabin was warm and lived in. Books lined one wall, unexpected in a mining settlement. Eleanor served coffee in delicate cups that seemed out of place yet perfectly aligned with the quiet dignity she maintained. "I'll be direct," she said, sitting across from him. "You're educated in the law. I need someone who understands legal matters." Harrison tensed. "What makes you think—" "Please," she interrupted gently. "Silver Gap is small and I've made inquiries. Your vocabulary, your bearing, your instinctive reference to constitutional protections, you're a lawyer." "Was," he corrected reflexively, then cursed himself. "The circumstances of your departure from the profession are your business," she continued. "But I'm facing a legal battle I cannot win alone. Blackwood has filed a claim stating my husband sold him mineral rights before his death. It's completely fabricated, but he has documents with what appears to be Thomas's signature." Harrison's anger flared. "Forgery. Certainly, but the judge will rule in Blackwood's favor regardless. I need someone who knows how to fight this properly, even against a corrupt system. Mrs. Reed, Eleanor, please." "Eleanor," he amended. I can't practice law anymore. I can't represent you. I don't need formal representation. I need guidance. Strategy. Her eyes held his. I can pay you. It's not about money. Harrison set down his cup, hands unsteady. I failed the last client who trusted me. Catastrophically. Tell me, she said simply. Perhaps it was her directness, or the isolation of recent months, but Harrison found himself speaking. I was a respected defense attorney in Boston. The Harrington case. Perhaps you read about it. She shook her head. Alfred Harrington, railroad magnate, accused of negligence resulting in a bridge collapse. 42 people died. I believed him innocent based on the evidence he provided. Harrison stared into his coffee. I was brilliant in court. Discredited witnesses, challenged inspections, created reasonable doubt. Then, after winning acquittal, I discovered documents in his files. He'd known the bridge was unsafe, diverted repair funds. He'd let those people die to save money, and I'd helped him escape justice. What did you do? Eleanor asked quietly. I confronted him. He laughed, said that was why he'd hired the best, to clean up his messes. Harrison's voice hardened. I took the evidence to the district attorney, but Harrington had powerful friends. The evidence disappeared, witness testimony changed. Instead, I was accused of violating attorney-client privilege, fabricating evidence to harm my client after successfully defending him. They couldn't prove it conclusively, but my reputation was destroyed. No firm would touch me. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid me. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. You tried to do what was right, and failed spectacularly. Harrison stood, pacing the small room. I can't help you, Eleanor. I'd only make things worse. You're the only person in this town with the knowledge to help me, she insisted. If Blackwood takes my claim, it's not just my livelihood. It's my husband's legacy. Thomas died for this mine. You believe it wasn't an accident. I know it wasn't. Her composure cracked slightly. He discovered something in the connecting tunnel. Something that made Blackwood offer to buy us out immediately. When Thomas refused, the accident happened within a week. Harrison felt the familiar pull of injustice, the need to right a wrong that had defined his career. What was in the tunnel? I don't know exactly. Thomas was cautious about telling me details until he was certain. But it's connected to why Blackwood wants this land so desperately. Harrison struggled internally. The smart move was walking away, preserving his anonymity, avoiding another failure. But Eleanor Reed, with her quiet determination and clear eyes, deserved better than the fate Victor Blackwood had planned. I'll look at your documents, he finally said. I'm not promising more than that. The relief on her face was painful to witness. Thank you. Over the next week, Harrison reviewed every piece of paper related to the Reed claim. Thomas Reed had been meticulous in his record-keeping. The forged document Blackwood presented was skillfully done, but contained subtle inconsistencies with Thomas's authentic signatures. Unfortunately, proving forgery would require an impartial judge, something Silver Gap lacked. He also began carefully questioning townspeople about Thomas Reed's death. Most were reluctant to discuss it, but Harrison pieced together troubling details. The cable that snapped had been newly installed the previous month. The worker who had secured it had left town immediately after the accident. No one had been allowed to examine the broken cable. It had been removed and disposed of immediately. Harrison was returning from interviewing a former Reed employee when 3 men intercepted him in an alley behind the general store. He recognized Deputy Mills and Preston, Blackwood's lawyer. The third man, broad-shouldered with cold eyes, was unfamiliar. Mr. Wilson, Preston said pleasantly. Or should I say Mr. Green? Harrison Green, formerly of Cabot and Marsh, Boston. Harrison's blood ran cold. You see, we were curious about Mrs. Reed's new friend. Sent a telegram east. Fascinating response. Preston circled him slowly. Disgraced attorney. Accused of betraying a client. How the mighty have fallen. From defending railroad magnates to clerking in a dusty general store. What do you want? Harrison asked, keeping his voice steady. Simple. Stop helping the widow. Return to your pathetic existence counting beans, and we'll keep your secret. Silver Gap doesn't need to know they have a disgraced lawyer in their midst. And if I refuse? The broad-shouldered man stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Then we'll convince you more directly, after we ensure Mrs. Reed learns what happens to people who trust you with their problems. Harrison tensed, calculating his odds against 3 men. They were poor. Consider carefully, Green, Preston continued. Blackwood owns this town. The judge will rule in our favor regardless of what evidence you think you've found. Don't destroy what little you have left. They left him there. Message delivered. Harrison slumped against the wall, shame washing over him. Preston was right. He couldn't win against Blackwood's influence. Helping Eleanor was futile, possibly dangerous for her. That evening, he packed his meager belongings. He would leave a note for Mrs. Porter, perhaps some money for Eleanor to hire a real attorney from Denver, though he knew no outside lawyer would prevail in Silver Gap's corrupt court. A frantic knocking interrupted his preparations. He opened the door to find Mrs. Porter, face flushed with urgency. "It's Mrs. Reed," she gasped. "There's been a caveat at her mine. 2 workers trapped. She's asking for you." Harrison forgot his plans instantly. "I'll come now." The scene at the Reed mine was chaos. Lanterns illuminated the area around the main shaft where men worked frantically to clear debris. Eleanor stood nearby, face streaked with dust, directing operations with remarkable composure given the circumstances. "Harrison," she called when she saw him, using his real name for the first time. "Thank God. We need to document everything." This was deliberate. Before he could respond, a commotion arose as riders approached. Victor Blackwood himself led the group, looking every bit the wealthy mine owner in a tailored suit despite the late hour. Harrison finally faced the man whose shadow loomed over Silver Gap. Blackwood was older than Harrison expected, perhaps 60, with silver hair and aristocratic features hardened by decades of ruthless business. His eyes were calculating as he surveyed the scene. "Mrs. Reed," he called, dismounting smoothly. "A terrible accident. I've brought men to assist." "This was no accident," Eleanor countered, stepping forward. "Someone deliberately collapsed the support beams in the north tunnel. My men saw it happening but couldn't stop it." Blackwood's expression remained sympathetic, though his eyes hardened. "Mining is dangerous work. Poor maintenance." "The beams were replaced last month," she interrupted. "And this happened only hours after your men were seen near that entrance." Blackwood noticed Harrison. "Ah, Mr. Green, is it? Interesting company you keep, Mrs. Reed. A disgraced attorney with a history of betraying clients." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Harrison has been honest with me about his past. Unlike some, who forge documents and arrange convenient accidents." The rescue work continued as they spoke. Finally, shouts indicated the trapped miners had been reached. Both men emerged alive, though injured. As they were tended to, one grabbed Harrison's sleeve. "It was sabotage, sir," he gasped. "Sawed through beams. Would have killed us if Tom hadn't spotted it starting to give." Harrison looked up to find Blackwood watching him narrowly. The mine owner turned to Eleanor. "My offer stands until the hearing, Mrs. Reed. After that, I'll acquire this worthless pit for even less when the judge rules in my favor." After Blackwood departed, Harrison pulled Eleanor aside. "He knows who I am. Preston confronted me earlier." "I suspected as much," she replied. "Does it change anything?" Harrison considered the question. His instinct for self-preservation battled with the growing certainty that Eleanor was fighting against calculated injustice, the very thing that had driven him to law in the first place. "No," he finally said. "If anything, it means I have nothing left to lose." Eleanor's smile was worth the risk. "Good, because I found something in Thomas's papers that might explain everything." In her cabin, she produced a leather journal from a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard. Thomas kept separate notes about his geological findings. "I didn't understand their significance until I studied them more carefully." The journal contained detailed maps of the underground formations. Harrison wasn't a mining expert, but even he could see the significance of what Thomas Reed had discovered. A massive silver vein running through Blackwood's property, but accessible only through the Reed claim. "This vein is 10 times richer than anything publicly known in the valley," Eleanor explained. "If developed properly, it could outproduce everything Blackwood currently controls combined. Thomas discovered it when expanding our tunnel system. And Blackwood wants to seize your claim to access it himself," Harrison concluded, "without paying what it's truly worth." "Exactly. But there's more." She turned to later entries. Thomas believed Blackwood has been systematically falsifying production reports to investors and the government. If true, it's massive fraud. Harrison studied the journal entries. Thomas Reed had meticulously documented discrepancies between observed or transports and official reports. This could explain why Blackwood is so desperate. If this information became public, he'd lose everything. Can we use it to stop him taking my claim? Harrison thought carefully. Not directly. Judge Walton won't rule against Blackwood regardless of evidence. But this gives us leverage and a different approach. The next morning, Harrison visited the telegraph office and sent several expensive messages to contacts in Denver. Then he called on Eleanor's remaining workers, gathering sworn statements about the sabotage. Finally, he requested a meeting with Lawrence Preston. Blackwood's lawyer received him in a well-appointed office above the Blackwood Emporium. Mr. Green, I thought our conversation yesterday was clear. Crystal clear, Harrison replied, taking a seat without invitation. I'm here to make a counterproposal. Preston laughed. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. Perhaps not personally, but as Mrs. Reed's advisor, I'm authorized to offer terms. Harrison placed a document on the desk. Mrs. Reed will sell her claim to Blackwood Mining for $50,000, a fair price given what we now know about the silver deposits. In exchange, there will be no further investigation into Thomas Reed's death or certain accounting discrepancies. Preston's smile faded as he scanned the document. These are baseless accusations. Perhaps, but I've sent documentation to the territorial governor and U.S. Marshal's office suggesting official production reports don't match actual or shipments. Tax evasion of that magnitude tends to interest federal authorities. I've requested they send investigators. Nobody will believe a disgraced lawyer and a desperate widow, Preston snapped, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Possibly not, but the documents will trigger an investigation. At minimum, it will bring unwanted attention to Silver Gap's curious judicial system. Questions Mr. Blackwood likely prefers remain unasked. Preston stared at him. I'll convey your offer. That afternoon, Harrison prepared for the hearing, knowing Blackwood likely wouldn't accept the offer. Their best hope was making the potential scandal public enough that Blackwood couldn't risk pursuing the claim further. Eleanor met him outside the courthouse, dressed in her finest clothes. Preston was watching my property all morning. I don't think Blackwood's accepting our terms. I didn't expect him to, Harrison admitted. But we've created uncertainty, which is something. Inside, the small courtroom was packed. Harrison noted several unfamiliar men in the back. Probably Blackwood's reinforcements if things turned ugly. Judge Walton, a thin man with perpetually narrowed eyes, presided with obvious impatience. As expected, the proceedings were a farce. Preston presented the forged document, and despite Harrison's objections about authentication, Walton accepted it readily. When Harrison attempted to introduce Thomas Reed's journal and evidence of sabotage, the judge dismissed it as irrelevant to the property dispute. The court finds that Thomas Reed did indeed sell mineral rights to Blackwood Mining Company, Walton announced, to no one's surprise. Mrs. Reed is ordered to vacate the property within 7 days. Eleanor gripped Harrison's arm tightly, but her expression remained composed. As people began filing out, Harrison stood. Before we conclude, Your Honor, I'd like to introduce a new witness. Walton frowned. The evidence portion of this hearing is closed, Mr. Green. This witness has just arrived from Denver, Your Honor. John Merrick, Federal Mining Inspector. A murmur swept through the courtroom as a stern-looking man in an official uniform entered. Harrison had wired his old classmate at Harvard, now working for the Department of the Interior, explaining the situation. John had agreed to make the journey immediately. Your Honor, Merrick announced, I'm here investigating serious allegations of tax evasion and fraudulent production reporting at several mines in this district. I've received documentation suggesting systematic underreporting of silver extraction at Blackwood operations. Blackwood rose, face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. Walton, dismiss this interruption. Judge Walton looked uncertainly between Blackwood and the federal inspector. Even he couldn't simply dismiss a federal official. Furthermore, Merrick continued, I've received disturbing reports about environmental and safety violations, including possible criminal negligence in a recent fatality. Given these concerns, I'm issuing an immediate inspection order for all Blackwood properties and freezing any ownership transfers pending investigation. Preston leapt to his feet. You have no jurisdiction to. Federal mining law gives me precisely that jurisdiction, Counselor. Merrick interrupted coolly. Unless you'd prefer I telegraph for U.S. Marshals to ensure compliance? The courtroom erupted in chaos. Harrison led Eleanor through the crowd to where Merrick waited. Perfect timing, John, Harrison said warmly. Your wire made it sound urgent, his friend replied. And it appears I arrived just in time. Are the allegations accurate? Every one, Eleanor confirmed, producing Thomas's journal. My husband documented everything. As they spoke, Harrison noticed Blackwood conferring intensely with Preston. After a moment, the lawyer approached them warily. Mr. Blackwood would like to discuss a private settlement, Preston said stiffly. The negotiations lasted until nightfall. With federal scrutiny imminent, Blackwood's position had collapsed. He agreed to purchase Eleanor's claim for $75,000, far more than their original demand, and signed binding agreements releasing all claims against her property. More importantly, he signed a confession admitting the earlier document had been forged, though it would remain sealed unless he violated the agreement. As they left Blackwood's office, the mining magnate stopped Harrison. You've made a powerful enemy today, Green. No, Mr. Blackwood, Harrison replied calmly. I've simply remembered what justice looks like. Under the stars, Harrison walked Eleanor home. The weight that had pressed on him since Boston felt lighter somehow. What will you do now? She asked as they reached her cabin. I've been considering that, he replied. Silver Gap could use an honest lawyer. Someone to balance the scales a bit. Eleanor studied him in the moonlight. The town would be fortunate to have you. She hesitated, then added, as would I. Harrison took her hand gently. I came here believing my life was finished. That justice was a fantasy educated fools told themselves. And now I think perhaps second chances exist. That standing against wrong matters, even when victory seems impossible. He smiled, and that sometimes running away leads you exactly where you're meant to be. If you enjoyed Harrison and Eleanor's story of redemption and justice, make sure to comment below and subscribe for more Frontier Tales every Sunday. Which character's journey touched you most? Until next time, may you find courage when standing against impossible odds.